Good afternoon, and welcome to the Equality of Opportunity in Action, Strengthening Supplier Diversity. I'm Megan Trzynski, Senior Director of Strategic Alliances and Outreach here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This event is the first in a series of deep dive discussions, which are part of the Chamber's Equality of Opportunity Initiative, a partnership of more than 500 chambers and associations across the country aimed at uniting the business community around advancing data-driven business and policy solutions that bridge opportunity gaps and ensure that Black Americans and people of color have greater opportunities to succeed. Through these conversations, we aim to build the knowledge, skills, and understanding necessary to help all Americans earn their success, rise on their merit, and live the American dream. We are so glad you have joined us for this important conversation on building more diverse supplier networks. I'd like to welcome Rick Wade, our Senior Vice President of Strategic Alliances and Outreach. Rick?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Megan. You know, there are some 8 million minority-owned firms across America. And these are not just minority businesses, but they're very important parts of our social fabric within our societies. They're anchors in our communities. They generate revenue, they create jobs. And we believe that there is tremendous opportunity to create pathways for minority-owned enterprises to grow and expand. And that pathway is through supply chain and supplier diversity. So we're thrilled to have a leader in this space, my good friend, Adrian Trimble, President and CEO of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, join us in a conversation on challenges and opportunities with regards to supplier diversity. Please join me in welcoming Adrian.
Hello, Rick. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. It's always good to see you.
Thank you, Adrian, and happy holidays to you.
Same to you.
Let's jump right in. I mean, you lead a tremendous amount of the effort and the work across the United States and around the world around supplier diversity. Give us an overview of NMSDC. What do you do? How do you do it? Your membership and the process to become a part or a member of NMSDC.
Thank you, Rick. Absolutely. NMSDC, the National Minority Supplier Development Council, has been around since 1972. And our mission is simple. It's to connect minority business enterprises with corporate America supply chain needs, as well as other entities that are looking for diverse suppliers to drive inclusion in their supply chains. We have a mission of 4 pillars, that is to certify, develop, connect, and advocate on behalf of minority businesses to ensure that they have the resources, support, and access to opportunity that's so necessary. We do this work through our 23 affiliate councils that are located throughout the U.S. They are the delivery arm of NMSDC, and they are the ones delivering services on the ground with our corporations and our minority businesses, helping them get access to contracts, helping them with educational resources, helping them with sustainability processes, workshops, anything that can really help grow and sustain their businesses is what our network is designed to do. And again, we've been around doing this since 1972. We have over 1,400 national corporate members, another 1,100 plus local members. And the difference between those two is that we know that there are organizations that have global supply chain needs, national supply chain needs. So they have a membership structure that allows them full access to the goods and services provided for our minority enterprises. But then we also have local companies that we know may not have the need for a very broad reach, but they're still looking to connect within their communities. And that's where our local councils play an even more critical role with helping to get those companies access to minority firms within their organization. So that is the overview of NMSDC, what we do and how we do it and why we do it. And you mentioned it when you opened up. It really is about driving economic impact in underserved and underrepresented communities, job creation, and making sure that there is revenue, disposable, and discretionary income generated in those communities through the jobs created by our minority firms.
Yeah, you know, Adrian, the U.S. Chamber, obviously, we're excited about working and partnering with NMSDC and being the largest business organization in the world, representing some 3 million companies across every sector, size, and region. What I found in talking to CEOs and companies across America, that companies are at different places on the continuum. There's some who don't understand it. There's some who want to understand supplier diversity. There's some who say, we don't know even how to identify and engage minority enterprise. How do you even identify and engage diverse suppliers in the work that you do? I mean, what's the brass tactic secret sauce in identifying so that companies won't ever say, we don't know who they are?
Well, the first thing I tell folks is you need to be a member of an MSDC, either nationally or locally. That's the first step. But the beauty of it is that NMSDC does provide access to over 13,000 certified minority firms within our network. And when you talk about the ability to get access to those firms, again, we do this through a number of ways. We do this through our annual Business Opportunity Exchange, which is one of the largest trade shows in the industry, connecting diverse suppliers to corporate America supply chain needs. We have gotten more succinct around matchmaking opportunities and having our corporations really outline what goods and services are they looking for, and then giving them the opportunity to match with those certified minority firms that can provide services for them. That's another way that we're looking to do this. But the other piece that I think is so critically important that NMSDC offers is helping corporate America with their supplier diversity process inside their organizations. NMSDC established the best practices for supplier diversity inclusion years ago, and those best practices have been adopted by the $1 Billion Roundtable, which is the organization that has corporations that can demonstrate the ability to spend over $1 billion annually with diverse suppliers. So we know that those best practices work, and what we've done is we've expanded on those, and we help those corporations who are struggling or just don't know how to get their initiative started with giving them a roadmap, a toolkit to say, this is what you need to do. You need to have CEO commitment and engagement. You need to have top leadership support. You need to have a policy around what your supplier diversity and inclusion strategies are. So those are things that we offer to our members who are part of the NMSDC network, and allowing them to understand this is how you really jumpstart this work. And you're right, not everyone has the resources in place. Our councils across the country serve as a support system, a mechanism for those organizations that might need additional support.
You're not a newcomer to this. Let me be clear. I mean, you led Toyota's supplier diversity work years back, which is interesting because the automobile industry, this has sort of been a historical milestone. I mean, they to some extent are sort of the pioneers, if you will, historically, as we think about supplier diversity. But you referenced the $1 Billion Roundtable, companies that are doing at least $1 billion spend with minority firms. How generally are corporations performing? And I mean, I'm not asking for a rating because I know you could do it, but generally speaking, and obviously since the murder of George Floyd, there's been a new consciousness, the racial unrest. Companies are stepping up and pledging and making promises and commitments. And how are we doing generally with regards to minority diversity and supply chains across America?
I'll tell you, Rick, and you're absolutely right. This year has been just a series of dynamic changes that have really amplified the need to have more inclusion for diverse businesses, particularly for Black and brown businesses, right? When COVID first hit, we had a number of our corporate members actually pulling back, saying, our budgets have been significantly impacted. We don't know if we're going to be able to maintain our membership. What we found is that when the situation happened with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all of a sudden everybody's saying, okay, there are systemic challenges that are impacting diverse communities, particularly Black communities. How do we address these barriers? So now we're seeing corporations lean back in and come to the table saying, we want to be a part of the solution. And we're really pleased this year. We welcomed 80 new corporate members into the NMSDC network. Never before in the history of this organization have we had that many companies join brand new to the organization. So we know that the companies are now getting it. They understand it. We are getting a number of calls from folks trying to find who these firms are now that they can be doing business with. So we know that we need to have the resources and tools in place to prepare our minority firms to be able to provide services and goods and provide these solutions in the supply chain, because we're now seeing a pull for this information versus being a push that we had seen over the last several years.
You bet. And let me also, we have a great audience. Please feel free to submit any questions. Adrian will answer in a moment, but in our chat, submit any questions or comments that you like us to bring to the attention. Adrian, let me dial back just 1 second, because some people may not know what diverse, or in this case, minority businesses mean. In my work at the U.S. Department of Commerce, we work closely with MBDA, but who comprises this sort of minority business community as you working with them across the country?
So for NMSDC, that's a great point, Rick. For NMSDC, we categorize ethnic suppliers by African American, Hispanic American, Native American, and Asian American, those that can be ethnically certified. And we do, as part of our certification process, go through a very rigorous process to understand their ethnicity and that proof of ethnicity. So more information about the certification process can be found on our website, as well as on our local affiliate councils websites. But we do look at that ethnicity around African American, Hispanic, Native American, and Asian American.
You bet. In conversations with minority firms across America and some of the research, there's a lot of dialogue about what can minority firms do more to strengthen themselves, to be competitive in corporate supply chains, technological infrastructure. Do we think globally enough? Access to capital. Any thoughts or comments in those areas of what minority firms can be doing more and better at to shore themselves up so that they can participate and successfully deliver when opportunities present themselves?
Absolutely. And we talk about this all the time. We know that access to capital continues to be a major challenge and limitation for some of our minority firms being able to grow their businesses to scale and capacity. So we need our minority firms to be a little bit more flexible in their thinking, where they have opportunities for joint ventures, for mergers, for strategic alliances. Those are the types of tools and resources that we are helping our minority firms understand that may be helpful to them as they are looking to grow their capacity to be able to meet some of the larger scale opportunities that are in the corporate supply chain needs and in the federal government. So what we're finding is that, and this happened maybe a few years back, a number of corporations had supply chain consolidation strategies where they wanted to reduce the number of suppliers that they were working with, have those that could provide more broader services across their enterprise. We know that our minority firms have to be positioned to do that. So part of our responsibility is to challenge that strategy to ensure that we aren't creating more barriers to access for minority firms to be able to access these contracts. And how do we get them better positioned to be able to provide goods and services, again, either through strategic alliances, joint ventures, other ways to grow their scale and partner up with others that may be able to help them get access to the technology or resources or other business capabilities that will be necessary for them to be able to compete fairly and equitably for these contracts.
Yeah, and you and I've had this conversation before. One of my tremendous areas of interest is global. That old riddle, why did the bank robber rob the bank, is where the money is. 95% of our consumers are outside of our borders. So we also have to think about global opportunities as we think about supply chain and how do we work with minority firms, yes, to access capital, but also to think about how to access the world's consumers. I heard someone say, and I'll borrow this, that your net worth is determined by your network. How much does relationship and network matter in building opportunities between corporate America and minority firms?
Rick, it's everything. The relationships are everything because people do business with those they know, like, and trust. That's just the bottom line. And that's why NMSDC has such a focus around the connections between our corporate members and our minority businesses. And I tell people, even from my experiences back in my Toyota days when I was leading supplier diversity on behalf of a very large, complex organization, you have to understand who those folks are, what their capabilities are. And it takes time to understand that. It takes 3, 4, 5 different encounters, different times that you're meeting with them that you can learn how you can advocate best on their behalf. So those relationships are critical. And we've heard from some of our minority businesses that it's been tough that we're now in this virtual environment because you want to be able to sit down and have those conversations directly with folks. And sometimes technology doesn't always lend itself to that type of environment. But what we're hearing is that when we think about how do you maximize those opportunities, you have to continue to follow up stay in contact with their customers, know what their pain points are in their supply chain, and bring those potential solutions to the table for them. That's what this is all about, is bringing business solutions. And the only way that you'll know what those business solutions are is if you're talking to the key decision makers or the key business process owners inside the company and understanding what their needs are. That comes through relationship building.
Yeah, and again, let me remind the audience, please submit your questions in the chat. Love to for you to have a chance to engage Adrian with any questions or comments. You talked a minute ago, and we're all experiencing this, the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic. We did some research with MetLife, and sadly, we found that some 66% of Black and minority-owned companies in America are concerned about permanently closing. And whether it's 44%, there's been a number of studies and done on the impact, which is absolutely unconscionable when you think about it. But you touched on something that I talk about often also when I talk to minority firms. This may be an opportunity for them to reimagine themselves, to reboot, to rethink, to think about, as you mentioned, joint ventures and other structures. But it's also to think about emerging economies. Businesses will be born out of the pandemic, for example. And so I'm just curious about, how do you think about going forward beyond 2020 and 21 and 10, 15 years? Any insight, if you had a crystal ball, on what supplier diversity would look like and should look like? And what are the emerging economies or opportunities for minority-owned businesses?
Rick, that's a great question. And what we found is that COVID did allow minority firms to really identify where they could provide solutions where there are gaps in the supply chain. So for instance, when this whole pandemic started, companies couldn't get enough hand sanitizers. So we had firms within our network that retooled their manufacturing processes to be able to provide hand sanitizers to augment those needs that corporations have. It goes back to what we talk about from those relationships. We've got to understand what are the problems that corporate America is facing so that our businesses can be positioned to provide solutions. We know, and what we've heard is that cybersecurity is a huge area of need for businesses, not just for corporate America, but also for MBE firms. We've had a number of our corporations come to us and say that they want to help us create strategies that can help support the technology platforms within their organizations, as well as within their supply base. That's another area that we're really tapping into, is how do we help with this whole digital transformation that's going to continue to evolve over time, and where those gaps are going to be in the supply chain, so that we can look to build those solutions here in the US versus having to find offshore support and remedies for those types of solutions. So those are some of the things that we're really looking at. And again, I really challenge our MBEs to be very disciplined around understanding where there are gaps today, where they see gaps and pain points from corporations in their supply chain, and bringing forth those solutions. It's all about problem solving for these businesses, and that's where we add value. It's not about a contract, it's about bringing a business solution to the table.
That is a very, very, very good point, and thank you. It's about helping business and industry solve solutions, and so that we all can be more competitive. We got a couple of questions from the audience. One of our audience members is asking, you discuss flexibility in terms of growing scale. Can you share any success stories from what suppliers have done to improve their strategy?
Absolutely. So one of the things, we have a group of our companies within NMSDC called Corporate Plus. Corporate Plus members are those that have the capacity and the ability to be able to demonstrate their capacity on a national scale to fulfill national contracts and needs for corporations. It's a separate designation of our minority firms. And what we're finding in that group particularly, that is the group that has been very flexible in terms of looking at different ways to leverage capital, to leverage private equity. And we're working very specifically to understand ways that we can have the flexibility for our firms to get access to that type of capital that will not impact their minority certification status. So we're trying to make sure that we understand that. We have a program that's called our Growth Initiative, and it's designed for that particular purpose, to allow some of our firms to be able to get access to the capital that they need to be able to grow, so that they can continue to provide services on a much broader scale, remain minority certified, and have the flexibility to have an influx of cash into their operations. So there have been a number of firms that have utilized that growth initiative strategy for us, and NMSDC is going to be providing more information about that so that our firms can understand the best ways to be able to access that type of capital need for them.
Yeah, and speaking of success on the corporate side, I think I read where you named Walt Disney Company NMSDC Company of the Year. What went into that? I mean, why was Walt Disney Company named Company of the Year?
Absolutely. So for NMSDC, we changed our Corporation of the Year process because we used to only name one company and Corporation of the Year for a number of years because it's a very prestigious designation and it's a very hard opportunity for companies to be able to be identified as Corporation of the Year. Our Corporation of the Year candidates are actually selected by our minority business enterprises. They are the ones that set the process, review the criteria, and make the selection of those firms. We have broken that out now into different classes so that we can make sure that firms can actually compete against each other in similar supply chain scenario. So for instance, we have a class 1 up through class 5. And we did that again so that these firms can compete. Walt Disney was selected. I believe they were a class 3 winner, but I don't have that number in front of me. So please don't hold me to that. But they were selected because of their ability to be able to find those opportunities in the non-traditional areas within their supply chain, those areas that are oftentimes overlooked. So when we think about ways that we always go to some of maybe the more obvious needs, such as staffing and IT, things of that nature. But what are some of the other areas that haven't been tapped into more broadly within their supply chain? That's what Walt Disney did. They found some of those areas, particularly in the entertainment, the media. They found ways to get those suppliers certified. Those were things that we found to be very transformative for their business and how they were able to grow their supply chain and getting the other parts of their business involved in the process. That's what we wanted to make sure. We don't want it to just to be a supplier diversity initiative. It needs to be an enterprise-wide initiative, and that's the approach that Walt Disney took.
Yeah, and that becomes a best practices. We need to look at examples of these successes. Another question from our audience here. How do NMSDC member companies cut through the onboarding process with those participating corporations? The onboarding process, I'm assuming, with regards to becoming a vendor with corporations.
Can you say the question one more time for me? I want to make sure I understand it.
I think they're asking how do NMSDC companies, your member companies, MBDs, cut through the onboarding process with participating corporations. In other words, is it a very is a process? Do you work to streamline the process for becoming a vendor or a supplier with the corporation on behalf of an MBE?
So one of the things that we do is we actually have a group called our Supplier Diversity Advisory Council. And those individuals actually look at supply chain strategies and ways that they can streamline the process so that we can have best practices identified that would better help our minority firms get positioned within the supply chain needs within a company. So we do this by putting in place committees. Again, we have our industry group chairpersons. We have industry groups that represent various factors within corporate America, whether that's automotive, manufacturing, healthcare. And we work with those groups to understand what are the best practices that exist within various companies, highlight those so that we can strengthen everyone's process across the board. Those are the types of ways that we utilize our resources that are available to us by being a member of NMSDC and helping other NMSDC companies strengthen their processes. Sometimes it's a lot better to hear it from your colleague. And one thing we've always said about NMSDC, we may be competitors in the marketplace, but in this space, we are collaborators, and we collaborate with each other to help each other strengthen their processes within their organizations.
You know, one of the things that perhaps we should talk more about is the role of government. And the United States government is one of the biggest, the largest, if not the largest purchaser of goods and services, perhaps in the country. Any thoughts on the role of organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and trade associations, the advancement of diversity and supplier diversity through advocacy and policy? How should we be thinking about government contracting? Any thoughts there, or do you engage much on the government side of contracting?
Absolutely. We've actually already started having conversations with the Biden-Harris transition team for the Small Business Administration to understand what we should be doing to help provide more visibility to opportunities that are going to be coming out of the federal government. We know that there's going to be a lot of recovery work around infrastructure for this country. And we want to make sure that our minority firms get access to those opportunities. I've had the pleasure of working with Congresswoman Waters and Congresswoman Beatty as part of their work on the D&I task force for Congress, helping to understand how can we better structure the RFP process within the federal government so that we can have stronger inclusion efforts and move away from what we consider best efforts and making sure that there are more deliberate outreach efforts for MBEs to be included. So those are some of the things that we're looking at behind the scenes. It's how do we look at their recruitment processes, making sure that we understand what those are, and how do we get our firms positioned to be able to bid and have the opportunity to know what those opportunities will be coming down the pipeline. Those are some of the things that we're doing, because you're right, the federal government is the largest procurement resource within the country, and we want to make sure that as packages are being developed, that they are being developed with the understanding of how minority firms can have access to those same opportunities, and getting past some of the red tape and bureaucracy that exists, and making it a much easier process for them to understand what the requirements are, what they need to do to be prepared, and making sure that they're ready when those opportunities are released to the public.
Adrian, listen, let me say thank you again for a chance to talk with you, for providing not just time, but your expertise and your knowledge. And we look forward to working with you at the U.S. Chamber to advance more opportunities for minority-owned enterprises and supplier diversity. So count us in as a partner. Thank you again. I wish you a very happy and safe holiday season, and onward together. Let's make it happen.
Absolutely, Rick. Thank you so much for the partnership and the collaboration. We look forward to working together in 2021 and beyond. Have a wonderful holiday season and stay safe.
You as well. I'm delighted now to bring up the next panel, which will be led by my friend and colleague, Tom Sullivan, Vice President of Small Business Policy here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Tom.
Hey, folks, this is Tom Sullivan. I'm the Vice President for Small Business Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for joining us. I am thrilled to be able to tap into the minds and experiences of this panel. We are going to do a lightning round of self-introductions, and then I was told when we met previously, like, don't gloss it up into these lengthy introductions, jump right into the substance. So that's what we're going to do. But first, Brian, you're first on the hot seat. Introduce yourself. Welcome. It's great to see your face. And then we'll go a quick lightning round and then jump right into some questions and answers. Brian?
Always great to see you as well, Tom. I'm Brian Butler. I'm the president of Vistra Communications. We're a full service integrated marketing, communications, and consulting agency. With about 100 employees, providing services to Fortune 10 clients, as well as local and state government and federal government as well.
Thank you, Brian. Frank, you're up next.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. We're honored to be here. My name is Frank Irvin. I'm Group Vice President of Government Affairs and Supplier Diversity for Piston Group. Piston Group is a diverse company, an MBE founded by ex-NBA star Vinnie Johnson, who played basketball in Detroit for many, many years, and has since grown a company. We're presently, we have 4 separate companies. We're, as of 2019, we're about $3.2 billion in revenue with over 12,000 employees in North America.
Well, Frank, thank you. And I know certainly you're no stranger to the automotive supply industry. 35 in your bio that all of the participants have access to. 35 years in the global supply chain of automotive supplies. Really, really impressive. And when we first spoke, you warned me about putting you and Reggie on the same panel. So, Reggie, why don't you explain what the danger is here, just so we don't surprise any of our viewers. Reggie, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Tom. The danger is you only gave us 30 minutes, and Frank and I will absorb that by ourselves. So I'm going to be very quick. Reggie Humphrey, I lead supplier engagement for General Motors. Very proud to stand on a 52-year legacy of driving supplier diversity at General Motors, which I believe is the economic engine that's truly going to drive empowerment, equity, and inclusion. And just glad to be here. My role is simple. It's here to deliver solutions underneath our global procurement organization. So I have got a piece that relates to governance, relationships, inclusion, and performance. And that's what makes up our supplier engagement team. So I'm just glad to be a part of this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Reggie. Tom, last certainly but not least, especially in these days of the coronavirus pandemic, you help run a supply chain of a time that is more important than right now. So welcome. Thank you for being here. And please introduce yourself, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Tom Tadicheri with Genentech. We are a biotech pharmaceutical company that is focused on bringing life-changing medicines to patients around the world. So we are, just to give you an idea, we became part of the Roche Group in 2009, and we are the US headquarters for Roche Pharmaceuticals. Over 40 plus FDA approved drugs already in the market, and we are committed to science, following where science leads us, with a focus on the patients. Glad to be here, Tom.
Well, thank you, Tom. Frank, I'm going to kick it right back over to you, because when we talked a couple of weeks ago, you had said, there's all these softball questions I could ask, but really getting right at the heart of the matter, you said, let's just kick this panel off with the toughest and most obvious question. Why now? Why should America's business community, large and small, be focused right now on supply chain diversity?
Well, and that's a great question. I think that it's a great time to celebrate supplier diversity in the marketplace today. And I think that as suppliers grow themselves and look at their core competencies and expand their core competencies and become more obvious to the larger organizations, that's what we ought to do, and that's how we want to do it. And the partnership that we create with corporations to do business will show these corporations that we have the core competency and the ability to get it done.
Thank you, Frank. You warned me about this, that anytime you say something, Reggie's
always got something there.
So Reggie, here's your first chance.
So it's simple, right? Adrian just talked about it. The NMSDC was created in 1972. General Motors began its program in 1968. The reason was the same economic injustices, the same social injustice that we see today was GM's answer to those. And so I want you to think about this. Supplier diversity, we do a lot of emphasis on workforce diversity, and that's certainly important. That builds families. Supplier diversity builds communities through this economic empowerment. So when we find and get really deliberate and intentional, that's my definition of D&I, deliberate and intentional acts to make sure that we are growing diverse suppliers who tend to hire diverse communities of people who then have income, all of corporate America wins. And that's the true statement behind why any corporation should be driving diversity within their supply chain.
Reggie, thank you. I'm going to turn to my friend Brian Butler, small business, who is a supplier, in a second. But I am told by my boss make sure that the participants know that you, Tom Sullivan, are not the only one who gets to ask the questions here. That in fact, the people who are taking time out of their busy day to see this panel, you also have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments and engage with the panel. So please do so that at your convenience. And until we see some of those questions, I'm going to keep plowing right forward. And Brian, Reggie put it really well, and that is that employment builds families. It builds communities. You're a small business supplier yourself. How do you react to two things? The importance of building families and communities, but secondly, why now? Where are you seeing that right now at this point of time is an opportunity for other small businesses to be part of the supply chain from a diversity perspective?
Thank you, Tom. Well, Reggie was right on the mark. First of all, there is no better time than right now. There are literally hundreds of thousands of small businesses, small African-American owned businesses and other minority businesses across the country that are standing ready to provide services. I started this company after I retired from the Army right out of my house. Today, we have about 100 employees. We build culture and we build employee relationships to deliver great client services. And out of those 100 employees, approximately 50% of them are non-white employees. So we built a company based on providing the ability to provide a range of diverse people in the company that don't all look alike. They don't all think alike. They don't all act alike. But what they do is come together to provide great solutions for our clients. And when you invest in them, they invest back into communities.
Well, thank you, Brian. Tom, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and kind of build on something that Brian had talked about, and that is the mix within a company, but then a mix of people who don't all look the same from a supplier perspective. So when Genentech looks at its supplier base and they know the importance of diversity within that base, you as a corporate executive have got to be kind of looking at, okay, are we going in one direction that might hurt the company? Or are we going in a more diverse direction that will benefit the company? Can you talk a little bit about how diversity actually benefits the C-suite in larger companies that have successful supplier diversity programs like Genentech?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you look at broadly the picture of a health equity in this country, health equity is so critical to be addressed. Maybe it might be in the face of inclusion of people of color in our clinical research or access to medicine for these communities of color. When you look at that, those are our customers, our patients. And that is a reflection of it should be a reflection of our supply base too. When we have to really look at, how can we provide equity in our supply base as well, in terms of providing the economic inclusion that Reggie talked about and others talked about. It is so critical that we absolutely have to really focus on how we as a company can stand up, especially at this time, and focus on that inclusion aspect so that this economic inclusion is like a ripple effect. You spend some money in a community or underrepresented community, and that supplier who is getting the opportunity is going to create another ripple, creating jobs in that community. So we really have to look at the big picture, the inequities in healthcare and the inequities in economic inclusion. So corporations like us has a moral obligation right now to stand up and really focusing on economic inclusion.
Thank you, Tom. I really like the way that you put it about ripple effect, because I think it builds on Brian, Frank, and Reggie's comments about employee base and families and communities. Reggie, GM certainly has a historical perspective on supply chain diversity. And I would love your insight on, kind of from a historical perspective, what were barriers back in 1970? And then right now, what are some barriers that you say that might be different from 1970? And how, as a community, do we help tear down some of those barriers? Reggie?
Yeah, so quickly, the barriers back then were just simply getting on the playing field, right? And so that's what developing these programs, creating the capital investment opportunities and channels that we created back then with the Minority Business Investment Fund, all of that created. Now it's a matter of we've got a lot of companies that are very mature in their supply chains, resting on their laurels, right? And thinking that, hey, we got enough diverse suppliers, we're good, right? So the question is, how do we make sure that our diverse suppliers, specifically our minority business entities, are relevant in tomorrow's supply chain? And what I say that is, when I look at our global platforms for vehicles, we want to create scale. We want to build a vehicle, but we want to get parts and services that go across the globe that can take one architecture and take it across global manufacturing footprints, and then technologies that are for tomorrow. We are committed to be a company that is zero emissions, zero congestion, and zero crashes. The suppliers that can deliver valuable solutions that allow GM, and again, the first thing I tell people when we go to a trade show or we engage is sit in the driver's seat and understand, what does your company bring in terms of valuable solutions that will allow you not only enjoy this customer experience, but also to be safer, to make sure that our world is sustainable. And so every supplier that actually delivers a solution that fits 000 has a chance. And I think that that's the biggest barrier right now, is finding diverse suppliers that actually have not only the talent, but also the scale and capability to deliver solutions that meet our needs of tomorrow, not just today.
Well, Reggie, thank you. And being a big fan of Robert Parrish from the Celtics, a 0-0 strategy actually rings true to me. But before I get to Brian to kind of touch on this question of like, oh my goodness, where do we start as a small supplier? I want to give you, Frank, the opportunity to follow Reggie, because he jumped right after you. Why not have fairness and have you jump right after him? Do you have a historical perspective, Frank? Anything to add to Reggie's comments about the differences and barriers now compared to the barriers in the early 70s?
Yeah, and so I want to tackle that because Reggie did a great job from the corporate side, but let's tackle it from the MBE side. I think, the barriers historically were we qualified to do the job? Were we qualified to have the ability to take on a platform, say in the automotive side, and actually be and actually make that platform happen? Did we have the financial backing? Did we have anything else? But I also think that the way we get past them, and one of the biggest barriers we have right now, is the ability to scale. We cannot scale. So it's incumbent upon us, MBEs, especially on the larger side MBEs, to bring along our other MBEs and make sure that we're not just out there by ourselves, we bring everybody else. For instance, MBE to MBE spend is urgent. It's important. If you look at what we do, our MBE to MBE spend in 2019 was $142 million. We have got to spread the wealth. And for those companies that are not able to go direct to the GMs of this world and get contracts and everything, we have to include them in what we do so that we bring them along with us.
Thank you, Frank. And Brian, again, kind of getting to the brass tacks of, part of our job is to get more and more businesses excited about participating. And in this case, minority-owned businesses, getting them excited about being part of supply chains. Brian, where do they start? What's your advice for those SMBs who are just kind of looking at putting one foot in front of another and starting to get to the place where that they can envision being a scaled company serving a global supply chain?
Well, Tom, it's pretty simple, actually. And Adrian shared some insights into this. You got to get certified in your state's minority supply channels, through your state's minority supply channels. Here in Florida, I've been certified with the Florida State Minority Supplier Development Council for a number of years. And I can remember trying to figure out how to get started initially, but we got started, we got certified. We take advantage of all of their training. We take advantage of all of the opportunities to network with the large suppliers and mid-sized suppliers. We build relationships with them. We've gone from trying to figure this thing out to last year, we were the Class 3 Supplier of the Year because we get involved, we get engaged, we understand what those larger clients are looking for, and where we can fit in, we try to do just that. This year we received the humanitarian award from the same organization, and it's because of what we do here in the community. But it really starts with just get certified and attend the networking events and attend the training events, because you never know where that can lead to.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I know certainly your efforts and engagement from a networking perspective are legendary. I will never forget 2 years ago when a dozen people approached me and say, "Hey, why isn't Brian Butler involved more in what we're doing?" And I kept like, "Who is this Brian Butler guy?" And finally, we got a chance to meet, and it's been wonderful ever since. So your networking, really, now you've gained a national reputation in a very positive way that has built upon your experience, A, from being getting certified, but B, the networking that evolves past that. Tom, we got a question from one of our participants who's dialed into this panel that is asking about the efforts that are going on to include diversity at the C-suite, within boards of directors of companies. Do you have an opinion on whether or not those efforts will lead to more companies improving their supplier diversity?
Absolutely. Great question from the audience. I mean, NASDAQ, just a case in point, NASDAQ recently came up with a requirement that the board of directors need to include a person of color and a woman. And that will definitely trickle down into the corporate America, the companies as well. And how does that translate to the MBE, more participation of MBEs? One thing resonated with me when Adrian talked about is collaboration. We have to not just look at the companies per se, but also the industry groups. For example, in the pharmaceutical industry, our industry group is pharma. How each of us, our member companies, are working very closely with the industry group pharma to really understand the lay of the land in terms of how each of our member companies are using MBEs in their supply chain. And we are incorporating programs and developing and being sort of like a toolkit, if you would, on the best practices that is getting shared from corporations that are doing very well in that group, and the other corporations who are on the journey are learning from it. So it is a collaborative effort that I foresee that is going to move the needle in terms of MBE utilization within corporate America, especially in industry pharmaceuticals.
Thank you, Tom. And Reggie, I think you had something to add about whether or not an increased focus of diversity in the board of directors actually will relate in increased diversity within a supply chain. Reggie?
Yeah, and absolutely. If you look at our history, right, in terms of having one of the first African Americans on a board of a major company, and then you look at where we are today with Mary Barr leading the charge as our CEO and chairman, it is absolutely critical to have that influence and impact at the head tables, making decisions. We have an inclusion advisory board that's made up of 9 of our senior leadership team members and 3 voices from the outside world representing suppliers, dealers, and our philanthropic efforts. And I believe that this is the core of what I call the 4 C's of driving supplier diversity: customers, competition, compliance, and culture. If you're lucky, you get a combination of all 4. And certainly when you look at things like a board and C-suites driving it down through compliance as well as culture, you find wins, because now the attention and the performance of the company is based off of what have you done to create an inclusive environment. GM has made a very bold statement that we are striving to be the most inclusive company in the world. We have 8 behaviors that drive our everyday activities, one of which is being inclusive, creating moments every day that not only embrace, but certainly honor different perspectives and backgrounds. And so I definitely believe that having the C-suite influence of a diverse community will certainly drive diversity within our supply chains at an all-time high level. And I want to make sure that when you think about the 3 elements, and I'll say this, of being successful based on some of the supplier questions, is the relationships that Adrian talked about, relevant solutions being brought to the table, like I talked about, and a proven track record of performance like Frank talked about.
Thank you, Reggie. We had another audience member ask a question about whether or not the pandemic has changed the way you're doing business and outreach to suppliers. Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. A case in point, we have a tendency to rely on large global partners to meet our business needs. What happened in March, April really turned the minds for a lot of people at Genentech. Well, just to give you a little story, we were promised the PPE products, which are high in shortage during that March, April timeframe, by a large supplier, that the product did not get delivered. The ask was to the supply diversity team, hey, can you reach out and explore your diverse network urgently? That day, the same day, we reached out to a supplier in Boston area, and this African American owned supplier had a few pallets of what we really needed to keep our operations running. So we reached out to them, and the owner was so agile and so helpful in the sense that he was even willing to drive the truck to a production plant in Branchburg, New Jersey, and provide the products. The next morning it arrived. And the same, what my point is, the sense of really engaging all the time with a large provider in a global scale is turning to how can we develop a local supply chain of MBEs and other diverse owned businesses who are agile and nimble, who are really wanting to help meet our business needs. So that conversation is happening, and it's happening strong.
Tom, thank you. And I love how you focused in on the agility and nimbleness of the SMBs, because that strength doesn't necessarily translate into some of their larger competitors, certainly an additional value add. Brian, same type of question about the differences of supply chains and the opportunities that exist in the pandemic. What about if we flipped it from the supply chain executive to the MBE who is looking to get more business in supply chains? Has your approach changed at all during the pandemic?
Our approach changed just a little, and mainly we made a conscious effort to reach out to every one of our clients, our vendors, those that provide, and just ask some very basic questions. How can we help you right now? Or here's some things that you may want to consider right now. We lost a couple clients early on. We lost a couple projects early on, but we were able to overcome that. And we'll finish this year as the best year we've had since we've been in business by doing just some simple things such as that. Listening to the environment, responding, being responsive, and picking up the phone and calling, asking, how can we help you?
And it's fascinating for me to hear, Brian, that you shifted to the right now, because so many suppliers have to look at a horizon that seems way beyond kind of the capability to look at, that you shifted into the right now, which obviously is a huge concern during the pandemic. And Reggie, I think you had a comment specific to the right now when it comes to personal protective equipment, PPE.
Yeah, absolutely. So when this all hit, GM did two very significant things that I'm very proud of. We built 154 days, we built 30,000 ventilators in partnership with Ventec Life Systems, right? I was on that team. The first person, one of the first people they came to was me based on my network. Hey, where do we find help, right? We had two specific MBEs, ACS, Archer Corporate Services, Dennis Archer Jr., Leon Richardson of Chemical Systems. Dennis took his order fulfillment that he does every day for us in the marketing services and flipped that into allowing us to be able to deliver consumables, which is any types of mask or hoses that hook up to the ventilators and get them distributed through our federal order. Leon Richardson's team actually went to Malaysia to find us a very hard to find solder that allowed us to be able to weld for the ventilators, right? So we went from an operation where Ventec was accustomed to building 5,000 ventilators a year, and we built 30,000 in 154 days. Wow. And these were two suppliers that played a significant role. On the flip side, we decided to build masks. There was a need in our local community. We got on March the 20th, we came up with an idea. By March 27th, we built our first mask. And a big part of that was who we networked with. I used the NMSDC to find out who were some of the suppliers from a manufacturing perspective that had any experience in this. What ended up happening is we found a woman-owned company in Goshen, Indiana called GDC that actually delivered the metal. It's called a melt-blown polypropylene that goes in the middle. That's the filtration fabric in your surgical mask. They actually pivoted from building what we have is in terms of interior vibration and acoustics material and thinned it out, working with our engineering team in order to become a filter and mask. We got up to the point where we've built over 10 million masks. Actually, I'm sorry, 34 million masks since we started this in March. And a lot of that had to do with the ability of some of our smallest suppliers being able to pivot from what they did every day. They looked to the left, looked to the right of the value chain, saw a need from their customer, and they responded. Very proud of all of these examples.
Reggie, I not only do I love hearing examples, but I love how excited you get about some of these MBEs and the successes that they bring. Because I think Tom mentioned it as well. Is that you get a good MBE, you tell their story, and dozens of other MBEs around the country benefit because someone in the executive position of supply chain saying, maybe we should think about that. Maybe we should build that in. Tom, we've talked almost entirely about the positive, which is fine, but there's also there's a challenge. Actually, Frank, there's a challenge here about disruption, and I'd love your thoughts. You'll probably get the last word here because we've got just only about 2 minutes left. But when you look at supply chain, you look at the unique value that MBEs play in the supply chain. What types of supply chain disruptions do you see in 2021 where MBEs might play a role in addressing those disruptions?
So I think that's a very important point, and it goes back to the last point we were making. I think, the pandemic is terrible, and it's really hurt a lot of things. But I think what's happened here is MBE companies have done something that the OEMs and the larger corporations are starting to see, and that is their ability to perform. When the economy started to open back up, and especially in the automotive sector, and the OEMs started to go back to work, the major problem that they were having and they were telling us about was, can their supply chain perform? And we focused along with our suppliers on saying to our customers, we will perform. And I believe that the disruptions in the supply chain will bring forward the ability of MBEs to scale and perform at the highest level that you've ever seen in the history of this country.
Well, Frank, thank you. And thank you all of you for participating this afternoon. Thank you, the participants who dialed in for this panel discussion, and all of you, all of our panelists. When you have these stories about MBEs performing and outperforming and inspiring, share them with us at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, because we want to inspire and help even more. We are partners with you in this effort. Thank you so much for participating this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to our speakers and to all of you for joining us today's event. As 2020 comes to a close, we would like to share a part of our Equality of Opportunity Action Series roadmap for the new year. In the coming months, we will be continuing these important dialogues focused on areas including education, employment, entrepreneurship, criminal justice, health, and wealth disparity. We are looking forward to sharing and discussing strategies to advance progress on these issues with policymakers and the business community. Wishing you all a safe, happy, and healthy new year.